Now, what I want to do is I want to look at the EU rosters and the rumored EU rosters, and I wanted to rate them. I want us to do it together, and we will basically just have a look. Let's take a look. Start with yours. Well, the rumored Fnatic roster. You know, the main thing with these group of guys is that you know, last year was not functional. You know, we had a lot of strong players, but we had players that couldn't flourish in the dynamic of the players. And I think that the core that was kept was these three players worked decently together, you know. And you know, the main thing is, even though while on paper I think this roster looks worse than last year, I think that the main thing will be how good can the cooperation between Rux, Razork, Humanoid be, and how can Reckless, you know, supplement a playstyle like that. Because I think in a world where you ask for Humanoid and for Wunder to perform, these guys can deliver. And the question is if they can perform better than last year based off of, you know, them having different type of players in the bot side. Will this be a more functioning roster? Because in order for this team to be a contender, Humanoid, Wunder and Razork need to perform much better. And the question is if Reckless and Rux will be able to supplement that for these group of guys. I think Rux, from the little time I've spent with him, I think he has a strong character. I believe that he is more consistent in his play than a player like Hilly. I think Hilly has a much higher ceiling. He has a very high ceiling, super high ceiling, but he needs very specific things from his teammates to achieve that ceiling. You know, he needs to, you know, feel connected with his teammates, and he needs to feel like that the bond is strong. That's why you see often whenever Whip and Hilly were put together, you know, these are guys that really functioned well. Can you wipe your camera? Yeah, I can try to do it. So the main question, you know, is, you know, Rock is a person that can bring leadership to the table. I think that he can push teammates around him to be better. But the main thing is, you know, the main thing is, will that be enough to elevate Fnatic to new levels? And I think that might as well be. That might as well be. I think that Wunder, Razork and Humanoid are fantastic players. I thought so last year too. I think Razork has grown so much as a player, and he's gotten used to the newer generation of, not newer generation, but the higher level of jungling, right? And I think that can be like a shell-shocking experience when you are experiencing it for the first time, and that demand is put on you in a very different fashion than, for example, what he was experiencing in Misfits. And I think Razork has grown to become more and more of a veteran. He just needs to make sure that he understands what he needs to do in order to perform, and the preparation it takes for him personally to perform and find consistency in that. But I think Fnatic definitely is a contender. I think this is a team that, you know, you could clearly see an identity here in terms of how they should approach the game and what they could achieve through that. And then the question is if that is going to work in practice. When we look at G2's roster, Hansam and Mickey X, even though Hansam and Mickey X might not have had the greatest seasons in the past year, Hansama, even though they didn't have exciting last years, I think that this combination is very deadly. I think Caps, Hansama, Mickey, often if you look at what has been important in past years of the LEC, I feel like the main things that stand out in the roles is usually mid and jungle, and then I think bot lane are always a close second and sometimes even first. And I think that they created a strong baseline, and I think in a world where top lane probably is the least interesting role when you look at Europe, right? When you look at Europe, I probably think that top lane is by far like the least interesting role. Like for me, from what I've seen so far, I think that Wunder stands tallest. I think Wunder is a very versatile player, very strong player that has a very high ceiling and potential still, and I feel like having a weakness in top side, weakness in top lane, I feel like this is not where I feel like finals and best of 5 series is defined that often. I think it's quite rare. I think more often we see the competition in the mid and competition in the bot really define series, especially in Europe. Of course, it's net meta dependent, and we have some new names coming into the scene. But top lane remains as a not impressive role when it comes to the EU, and I think that there is potential for players here to reinvent what it means to be a top lane in Europe. Broken Blade stays, and Yike is a new addition. I think Yike is decent, but it's always, when we look at Yike and Shio, I think it's always a different game to jungle against the likes of a Malrang or the likes of a Elioya. It is a completely different game, and usually when junglers come, often they also quickly go. And regardless of how well they performed in EU Masters and so forth, it is very difficult to judge, for me at least, how well Yike and Shio is going to do against the likes of Malrang, Bo, and Elioya, as an example. Koi, I think this, naturally from what we saw previous year, in terms of what I prioritize, of what matters in terms of strength, I think that this whole group, they lost Odoamne, alright? But I don't think, even though I think Odoamne is a very strong player, in the context of Europe, I don't think it's that big of a deal. That's a tricky thing. I think Shagenda is decent, what they've shown so far is decent, right? He needs a lot more experience, and he's going to be pushed here very well in this roster, right? He's going to get the opportunity to learn very quickly in the context of what Rogue is. For me, Koi on paper, just based on what we saw last year too, I think they walk into this season still looking very strong if they maintain all of these parts of the roster, right? If this is the rumored roster, I think it still looks really, really good, because in my mind, looking at the LEC, what you want to prioritize, what you want to look for, you want to have one of those mid laners that can compete at the highest level. Like, that's always core. Very rare do you see a bad mid laner in Europe win the LEC. It's like very rare that that's the case, right? So Koi is the team I am the most excited for. Astralis, I don't know the jungler yet. I don't know if Yankus is gonna join this roster. I would be very surprised if that's the case. But looking at a player like Finn, I think this opportunity, this chance for him to be, this chance for Finn to be in this XL roster, I think that's the best chance that Finn could have ever gotten. And I think that was the opportunity for him to prove that he can elevate and be in that position, right? Where he deserves more and is one of the names to be reckoned with in Europe. But I think it kind of fell flat. And Finn is now back, you know, in a pond where on paper it makes a little bit more sense for him to be in. And he will have to prove himself here in Astralis, because the main thing for me is that he, you know, these are the type of moments where you'll be in, you know, potentially your last chance. SK, you know, I think SK, they managed to grab some decent players. I think that for what SK is and for what SK, you know, are competing with in terms of budget, in terms of a name pool, and so forth, I think that this is a pretty decent roster. I think this is a roster with the right leadership and the right guidance. This is a roster that can piece together some things and potentially send some players to bigger teams at the end of the year. That's what I'm looking at. I think this is a team that, if you look at the bottom of the sphere, I think this is a team that can definitely squeeze themselves into the top 8. Over, for example, a BDS, or potentially over Heretics. Looking at Vitality, comes with a lot of question marks, but I think this is a roster. I have to admit, I don't know so much about Photon, so it makes it a little bit harder for me to talk about. But I think, in regards to what I mentioned before, if you are in the LEC, top lane is where you want to take risks. So as funny as it seems, already, you know, when I think it was when we were making the 2019 roster for Vitality, names that crossed my table was Burdul, Zeus, and Peanut, and also even Chovy back then. And you know, I was always inkling in that direction, but we had, of course, the leadership of Cabochard, and it made sense considering, you know, Cabochard was all pro top laner and did fantastic things. He went to Worlds and solo killing, you know, QV and so forth, you know. But I think if there's a place to take risks, if there's a position to take risks in, I say it's top lane. The main question here is that you have quite the spicy composition of players, right? You have someone from Korea, you have Bo that is from China, then you have Perks, Neon, and Kaiser. So this is going to be quite the project to piece together, but I think it always comes down to the same thing. You know, often what we see is the conversation about synergy. But in reality, the most important thing is acclimation. If a player like Bo or a player like Photon, if they can acclimate to Europe and still find good form, that is the most important thing. Can players move to Europe and play in Europe and still find their best form possible? It's not about, like, I know that if these players are gonna underperform, people are gonna say, wow, well, you have one player from China, one player from Korea, of course they can't communicate. But in my mind, as long as these players play insanely fucking good, a lot of things that need to be done with the game should be natural, right? They should be natural and they should be, you know, in the right direction. When you want to challenge your team and move forward and grow as a team, of course you need to be able to communicate between one another. But I think the biggest challenge always with foreign players is acclimation. How are you going to make sure that their level translates within Europe? That is also the biggest challenge when players move to North America. They think that the player they are is going to be the player they will be in a different location too. But just like polar bears in Antarctica, you know, they are bears that have acclimated to Antarctica. So they are white and so forth, and they take in a lot of light and whatever. They have adjusted to the climate. Then you have brown bears, black bears, grizzly bears, depending on the location, right? Team Heretics. You know, I remember playing against Ruby a long time ago. He was a substitute for Africa Freaks. He was a substitute for Africa, and he was phenomenal. I don't know how he is nowadays. I haven't watched his games, sadly. And I don't know how good he's doing nowadays, but I remember thinking when I saw him play, so basically this was around the time Irelia just got reworked, and Swain just got reworked, and Swain was OP, and then we played against the reworked Irelia. Jizuki refused to play it in solo queue, my man. I was like, Jizuki, you need to try this Irelia. I think Irelia mid is gonna be the shit. And then we play against Ruby Irelia, level 2 solo bolo, level 3 solo bolo, level 4 double kill. Gilius and Jizuke just got sliced up. But I feel like on paper this team, unless Ruby is the biggest donger on the planet, I think this is a team that will fight to qualify to the top 8. Mad Lions, you know, once again Chasey, I'm not so sure about him. You know, maybe I should have done more research, but you know, fuck it. Just looking at, I already mentioned it before, I believe Hilly is a player that can have a very high ceiling, and I think that this team has characters that are more fitting Hilly's personality. You know, I think that on this roster, Hilly as a player can find that ceiling again. And I think in the case that he does, this team naturally, due to Hilly's ability, can become very dangerous. I think that Elioya, Niski, Hilly can become strong enough engines to just crack some bones and to take games off of the weaker teams. I mean, also the stronger teams, honestly. But can I see a world where I think the overall field has gotten a little bit weaker on paper. So I think this makes Mad Lions a partial contender. Now if I'm gonna look everything like as a whole, you know, everything as a whole, and I want to do some ratings here, I think S is naturally Koi. I think that one is very easy to place. I think it's straightforward, clear and cut. You put them there. I think in terms of A, I think a lot of teams slot into A, and this is where it gets a little bit more boring. You know, I feel like if you look at, we can start where it's boring, right? We can definitely start where it's boring. This is how it would look like from the get-go, you know, in my mind. I think that we would place SK here. I would put Astralis here, and then is there a team that I'm missing? Yeah, the issue is I don't know the jungler of Astralis. I don't know the jungler of Astralis, so it becomes a little bit harder for me to place them. So now if we play the game, of let's limit A to 3 teams. Let's do that instead, okay? Let's limit them to that, and based off of that alone, let's see what my mind tells me. You know, if I have to choose 3 in the top column, you know, if I have to choose 3 in the top column, then probably it would be this. Yeah, this is where my first like gut feeling, you know, in which direction my gut feeling takes me. You know, the main thing for me, what I'm looking at is, you know, if we continue, right? If we continue here to this, like who are the S tier players in my mind, right? If I look at what we've seen so far, I think in jungle it's Elioya, Malran. I think it's also potentially Bo. It's like I would consider to put Razork Ivan here when he's playing at his best, but he's inconsistent, you know? Inconsistent. And Bo, of course, is just a bet, right? It's like Malrang, Elioya, Bo. Let's see if I'm missing someone. Maybe the Astralis mystery jungler. Astralis jungler. Ah, kidding. I think Ivan is a solid A, but if he raises his bar of consistency, can belong in that, S box. Mid lane, in my mind, Humanoid, Caps, Rasen, and Perks. What are mid laners that you bet on? You know? What are the mid laners that you bet on when you go into a series, right? What are the mid laners that you would want to bet on, right? The bot duos, I think Hans and Mickey. And then we have Comp and Trimby. These are my S tier duo bot lanes, right? I think the fact that Upset is not playing, is definitely a hit, right? And then we have pairings that definitely got weaker, you know? No, I think Ivan has very, very high potential as a player, but I keep in mind his performance throughout the whole year, right? Maybe bot lanes that could be argued is Karzi, Hilly, and then you potentially have, if we want to look at who would be A, right? It would be like Patrick Targamas, and then, we have plenty of A-tier bot lanes, right? Plenty of A-tier bot lanes, honestly. Karzi, Hilly, I would say Patrick Targamas, Neon Kaiser, Reckless Rocks. I think Neon Kaiser could be exciting. Yeah, Neon Kaiser is definitely like a bot lane that could potentially be here in S. But I would my mind is telling me A tier. That's the thing. I think often the community is way too fixated on, wow, we've got a weak side player, we're going to put this strong side. This is not, I can tell you this for sure, no one gives a fuck about this in LPL or the LCK. This is such you are band-aid solving your problems before they even occur. And the moment you begin to talk in these phrases, you're already making your team weaker. But all in all, I think this is a fair assessment. Obviously this can change, right? I could be very wrong. I already mentioned before there's some players that I don't know how to rate, like Chasey, Photon, and even Bo in the competitive setting. I've only watched him in solo queue. I think the main thing for me, right, if I give you guys some interesting extra thoughts on this, is that players like Shio and Yike, even though they are very hyped coming from the ERL scene, moving up to the LEC is like getting thrown into cold water, and you need to be able to swim when that happens, because jungling against a player like Elioya and Malrang is very different and can become very suffocating very fast. And with how the new format is set up, right? With how the new format is set up, you need to perform quick and you need to perform fast. But G2 is a team that proved last year under the cape of Dylan Falco that they started the season with very good form, right? And all in all, I think that this is something where they need to prove themselves. If there was a world where G2 ended up with Elioya, I would put them in S tier. But the fact that Koi has a mid laner that has won the league and has proven that he can compete against the best. They have one of the strongest bot lanes in Europe, and they have a jungler that can really capitalize on this and be a driving force in the game. They are already there with something that they can build on. And I think Shigenda will be a fine fit, and he is going to be able to grow here.